Thank you all so much for coming this evening. My name is Joanna Reiner Wilkinson, and I'm the Director of Programs for CDSS. And welcome all to our September edition of Common Time, our monthly program where we spotlight a different topic every month. This evening, we are delighted to have Dena Ross Jennings present for us. She'll talk today about cultural equity at the local level, and we'll look at the Fruitlandia example. And Dena will talk about what that is and what it means and how it applies to you and the work you're doing for your organizations at home. I just want to say a few things before we get started. Thing number one to note is that we are recording this presentation, and so you might be seen a little bit on camera. If you're shy about that, please feel free to keep your video off. We are planning on sharing the recording. We will publish it on our YouTube channel, and we'll also share the link with all of you and anyone who missed the presentation this evening. And you can feel free to spread the word, share the recording with others, because we want as many people to hear this as possible. We are keeping you all on mute, but if you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat and we will have time for questions at the very end. Many of you typed in questions when you registered. Thank you so much for those questions. I've shared them all with Dena, and Dena will address as many as she can during the presentation. So with that, there will be some other announcements at the very end, but I want to hand you to Dena Jennings, who wears many hats in her life. She is a physician, a musician, an instrument maker, an activist, and she spent more than 20 years working on transformation, cultural transformation, and she is also the leader of the CDSS Cultural Equity Advisory Committee. Dena, thank you so much for joining us. I want to hand things over to you this evening.
I'm muted. Thank you for having me, and it's a delight to be here with you. I just to let you know a few things up front. I do not see really well when things are written in chat. So if you do write something in chat, please don't feel that I'm ignoring you. I just can't see it. So Joanna's going to help me with that. So if you do have a question or something, we can get to that a little bit as we go along. There were a few questions that came with your registration, as Joanna mentioned. I'm going to be addressing those about midway through, and then at the end, we'll have time for questions as well. Okay. So I know some of you have been busy and rushing around today in order to come to this tonight. I do respect and appreciate that you were able to take some time away to spend some time to talk about what appropriation is and what appreciation is. And we're going to look at a spectrum of A's, which looks at everything in between those things. So I invite you first to just sit back and take a nice big breath. Whatever you need to do to be comfortable, whether it's a nice stretch. Okay. We're going to talk about some hard topics that can be hard for people today. So allow yourself a moment of self-care. If there's something in the room that you especially care about that you need to hold on to or keep close to you, that's fine to do as well. I'll show you what mine is. If anyone can guess what this is, I will be shocked and amazed. And what you win is the satisfaction of knowing that you got it. We have a beaver pond in our backyard that is about 20 years old. So it's been around about as long as I've been doing conflict transformation work. And this is a chunk that a beaver bit off. And I just love this little thing. I don't know why. I keep it here in my shop. And it's just something I like to hold on to and watch and look at and think about how busy and industrious beavers are. And they don't seem to complain either. They just keep working. Hopefully they're playing a little bit when they're splashing around in that pond too. So today what we're going to talk about is appropriation versus appreciation. And even though we all know those words, what do they actually mean? How do we notice it when we see it? What does it look like to appreciate something without appropriating it? And what does it look like to appropriate something while still appreciating it? I mean, why do you appropriate anyway? Why does anyone appropriate? Because they kind of like it, right? So there's some appreciation in there as well. And it can all get mixed up simply because we're human beings and that's what we do best. We mix things up pretty well. So what we're going to do is look at language first. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what our needs are as human beings. We'll talk a little bit about personality types, so how those needs might manifest in different situations. And then finally, we're going to launch into Fruitlandia, which is just an allegory that I wrote a while back, just to help you understand what this spectrum of A's looks like to go from appropriation to appreciation, especially when we're talking about our own culture or when we're talking about our own art, our own artistic expression and appreciation. I'll tell you a little bit of my art story. You heard that, I'm a physician and a conflict transformation facilitator and all these things that I do. I build banjos and gourd instruments, and the only thing I don't seem to do very well is sleep. But I do all of these things. And just to let you know a little bit about my art journey, I play a couple different stringed instruments, and I was playing in a coffee shop one evening, and a dear friend of mine, some of you might know him, Andy Cohen, he's a blues guitarist. He was just getting to know me, and after my set, I sat with him, and he says, "You realize you're playing banjo tunes on a guitar?" And I said, "What's a banjo tune?" That's how far away this was from me. He said, "Why don't you check this out?" He gave me some names to look at the Library of Congress. And it was about Black Appalachian music. I'd never heard that term before. I knew my mom was from the Cumberland Gap region of Kentucky. I knew that everyone she had any contact with and my family, and the summers that I go and spend with cousins in the Gap, and the music that we sang in church, because our church had all transplanted from there to Akron, Ohio, where I was raised. I knew all that. I knew that my church music didn't sound like Mahalia Jackson or James Cleveland, which I didn't understand. It sounded more like Roy Clark and Dolly Parton. I didn't get that. I just knew what my culture was. And this was the first time, I was in my mid-20s, that someone actually had a name to what I had been living my whole life. And that sent me on a long journey to discover the banjo and how to make them, how to play them, how to name the praise dancing that I saw at church is actually flat footing. I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that. And so this has been an interesting journey and a whole lot of fun for me to name some of the things that my family had lost along the way in favor of assimilation. My family had moved up during the Great Migration from Cumberland Gap area. And now I'm back here in the Appalachian area in Virginia. And my mom often puts it that it took a few generations for them to shake off all of this, and I just went back and picked it all up. So here I am. All right. So when we're looking at language, think in terms of language as reflecting our consciousness. That's what language does for us best. We have to think it, we have to feel it, we have to understand that before it actually comes out of our mouths. And so that language reflects our consciousness, and our consciousness is who we are at our core. So when we use words like appropriation versus appreciation, this spectrum that we're going to look at might give you a better understanding of how to name what you're actually experiencing. So let's go to that right now. I'm gonna try to share my screen here so we can see the spectrum of A's. Okay. Can everyone see that? The spectrum of A's. So here we have affirmation. And of course, affirmation is the ideal. People want to be affirmed. They want to be seen. They want to be heard and understood. That's what affirmation is. But along this spectrum of A's, there are a lot of things that can happen. We can fully appreciate what someone does and appreciate it to the point that we affirm it. I wholly appreciate people's ability to play the fiddle. I cannot play a fiddle. I can't even stand to hear myself practice, but I really appreciate someone's ability to play. So I'm always affirming that, like, wow, what you did was just amazing. And I really appreciate your ability to do that. We also have adoration. Adoration is kind of a slippery thing. All of these have, except for appropriation, all of these have their light side and their dark side, okay? So adoration can be really neat, and it can be adored to lead you to affirmation. But adoration in and of itself can be a little tricky. A fiddler that I really appreciate is Brian Farrow. He's with Gangsta Grass. If I only adored what Brian does and didn't affirm his ability to play, I could become a pretty obnoxious fan. You know, I'm just adoring what he does. And, oh, all I want to do is talk about what he does. Oh, I want posters of him up in my room. Oh, I want a t-shirt. Oh, I want him to sign my banjo or something at some point if I ever see him at a concert. So adoration can be kind of slippery, but it should lead to affirmation if it's a healthy adoration, okay? Adoption is another A that we look at, and adoption can lead to affirmation. Let's say, I'll give you another example of an artist that I know. His name is Ryan Webb. And Ryan is probably the single most glorious hip hop and house dancer I've ever seen. He's absolutely amazing with what he does. He grew up in a very wealthy suburb. His background is Scandinavian. He's tall, thin, and white. And he does hip hop like no one I've ever seen before. He has adopted that not only as a style that he does to express himself, it's his life. He eats, sleeps, and drinks hip hop. He's actually one of the art ambassadors that our country sends out to other people around the world to understand hip hop culture and music, because it's so much a part of who he is. No one else in his family does it. They don't understand why he does it. He has adopted that as his own. And in his adoption, he always points back to those people that taught him. He affirms their culture. He affirms what they brought to it and his ability to learn from them. I don't think I've ever seen him perform publicly where he didn't acknowledge the people that he learned from. So he has adopted it, but he doesn't walk as if this is his own and no one else's, and he just spontaneously developed all the styles that he does. He affirms those people that came before and that are contemporaries. So now we get to the A that's tricky, appropriation. Appropriation is when you take a culture, a style, a piece of art, intellectual property, those things, and claim it as your own without any affirmation, with very little appreciation for where it came from. Usually there's no adoption. You maintain whatever your culture is while you utilize this, this culture that you've picked up. There can be a lot of adoration. That might be why you picked it up in the first place. But most of these other things are blocked when you're appropriating. I'll give you a personal example. I make gourd instruments, so instruments all around the world. And I was making thumb pianos, kalimbas. I think they're great. I absolutely love kalimbas. And they weren't very complicated. I was giving workshops so people could learn how to make a pentatonic kalimba and play a song before they left. Until I watched a video and read a lengthy essay by a woman whose culture it is to play the kalimba. And she's kept from playing because sorry, I don't remember what country she's in, but she's kept from playing the kalimba because she's a woman. And it's almost impossible for her to break into playing this without ridicule, without all the things that she's suffering. She plays beautifully. And I felt like if I can't tell that story, and I obviously can't, if I can't tell that story, I really should stop making kalimbas until I can. Otherwise, I'm appropriating. And it felt very much like appropriation once I heard her story. Maybe one day I'll start making them again once I get a better understanding and can affirm her. But until then, it feels like appropriation to me. Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah, if you do have questions about that, just pop them in the chat and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look at another, I'm just gonna get rid of that. Oops. Let's share another screen here. Why is appropriation a consideration? Sorry. Here we are. Some of you might see this and remember it. If you had general studies at all in psychology while you might have been in college or in advanced classes in high school, you've seen Maslow's hierarchy before, and you probably thought you'd never see it again after the test. Well, here it is. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is why we even look at, it's another way of considering what appropriation is. And ironically, there has been charges against Maslow, who was a sociologist and psychologist. There have been charges against him for appropriating this system from the Lakota people. And that was a big to-do that went around about a year ago. Well, even the Lakota people some of the professors, people who are familiar with his work among the Lakota people came along and said, no, actually, he didn't appropriate. He appreciated what we were doing. He did not give credit because most of what he developed was his own thought, influenced by them. But more importantly, he felt it was important to get this information out. And at that time, which was the early part of the 20th century, he knew that this would be stopped dead in its tracks without, if there was any any pointing or reference to the Lakota people. So he didn't do that, though he spent many years of his life with them, learning from them. So it's sort of ironic that his work was considered an appropriation, but people spoke up and said, no, he's actually adopted it with affirmation. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are 5 levels of need. The basic is physiologic: food, water, warmth, rest, shelter. Those are things that we look at. Some models even say that art and artistic expression and appreciation should be on the physiologic needs, because it's that much a core of what artists do, what we as human beings do and need. So there's the physiological needs. Because this is a pyramid, it's important to get the base established before moving to the next level. So the next level we look at are safety needs. And what are those? The safety needs are going to be security, making sure that you're safe. Once you feel that you're safe, then you're able to step up and look around you and find out, where do you belong? What are your love needs? How do you belong in your society? What are your relationships? And then once you find those relationships, we look at esteem needs. How good at you are at those relationships? How well do you carry out those intimate feelings that you have for another human being? And finally, once you have these all established, we look at self-actualization. And self-actualization is doing something just because you feel like you want to do it. Okay, you're just fulfilling your needs. And that's what self-actualization is. But you need these other things at the base of the pyramid established before you can reach that level. Okay. So when you're looking on the local level, if you're wondering, how do I get underserved folks involved in dance? If you're trying to get someone involved who, say, is coming from an economically disadvantaged setting, it's sort of hard to say, hey, come dance with us and self-actualize when they may be looking at physiologic needs. Maybe they need to rest before they go to work in the morning, or maybe they're a little hungry, or maybe they don't feel safe in a setting that, even though your setting might be safe for everyone else, they might not feel as safe, you know? So, or that sense of belonging, or that sense of esteem before they can come and self-actualize. Okay. So this looks one way when you start at the bottom and you work your way up. It looks quite differently if you start at the top and work your way down. If you think of something that's self-actualizing, say like going to a movie with a friend, you need a friend in order to go to that movie. You need to have a good relationship with that friend before you go. You need to belong to one another. You need to at least know who this friend is. You're going to choose a theater that's safe. You're not going to go in a car that's going to break down on the way. And most likely you're going to lock your car in your house before you leave. And all those things, that your food, water, and warmth and rest, are all being housed in that house that you leave. So it's not very hard for people in general to start at self-actualization and work their way backwards. But just know that sometimes when you're offering something to someone, they may be anywhere along this pyramid at the time. Okay. So questions about that, we'll take those in the chat as well. All right. So I'm going to just stop for a minute and everybody take a nice deep breath. I'm going through a lot of information here, and I'm hoping that you're finding this understandable and that you're learning some things, even though you may have heard it before. But we have one more slide I want to share with you. And this is going to be on personality. Okay. When we look at personality, and all of this will make sense in a moment, why I'm cherry picking these things to talk about. But when we look at personality, there are 4 major personality types that we have as human beings all around the world, no matter what your culture is, or no matter what your socioeconomic class is, or race, or ethnicity, any of those things, religion. We all kind of fall into this area of 4 basic personality types, and different personality tests look at combining these 4 types different ways. So in the DISC profile, which this is, this graph is from, it looks at 4 and then a little blending of each. But then you have things like some of the profiles where there's like 16 different categories. Well, those 16 different categories are different blending of the 4. So basically, when we're looking at personality, we can consider ourselves outgoing or reserved in general. And we're people-oriented or task-oriented. Now, there's some argument that personality can change over time. You can modify the behavior of your personality, how it manifests depending on your situation. But I and others tend to think that personality is what you have when you're born, that's what you get. And you can do things to kind of tweak it and modify it, but it's basically what you're born with. So if you're outgoing and very task-oriented, that puts you in with a dominant personality type. That's what the D is for, this dominant personality. It doesn't mean you're dominant, it means your personality type is dominant, okay? If we look at being outgoing and people-oriented, that puts you in the category of an influence type of personality. So you like to influence, you like to encourage and get people going, get them inspired. If you're reserved and you tend to be task-oriented, you're what we call you have what we call a compliant personality type. And by compliance, it doesn't mean that you're a doormat. It means you like to know what the rules are. You want to know what the rules are so you can either follow them or know how to break them. But either way, you want to know what the rules are, and that'll help you accomplish the task. You're not so concerned about people. And then finally, the steady personality type is people-oriented and very reserved. This is probably the most intimate of all the personality types. Think of like a grandmotherly person who really, really cares about you and is kind of reserved, or a grandfatherly person who really, really cares about the grandkids, but they're a little reserved about that, not real outgoing. So our personality types can be blended of all of these. So you can be a little less people-oriented, but certainly outgoing. That might look a little bit more like a dominant personality type. And there are tests to see where you fall in these categories. It's not encouraged to just guess where you are on this, because with testing, you can actually find out what your personality type is and how it manifests in different situations, okay? So we've taken all of this in. If we look at personality type, Maslow's hierarchy, and language, that's certainly going to affect how we express ourselves with art, and it's going to affect how we respond to other people's art and culture. All of that's important for the story that I'm about to tell you, and that's for Fruitlandia. We're going to go through what Fruitlandia is about, and hopefully it will help you understand appreciation appropriation, adoption, adoration, this spectrum of A's that we looked at. You don't need to have that spectrum in front of you in order to understand this. So without further ado, we're going to launch into that. Joanne, we're doing okay for time? And
I think we're spot on for time.
all right. So what I want to first do is show you the diagram of Fruitlandia. I always say I should talk to the Milton Bradley people because this almost looks like Chutes and Ladders or Candyland or something. But in Fruitlandia, I'm going to point out the areas to you, and then we're going to read the allegory. I'll read the allegory to you. So Fruitlandia is in the valley of this beautiful hills. You see the sunrise. You can see the aerial tower. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. Aerial tower. There's a large city called Fruitopolis. There's a truck here going up to the city, and there's even shipping happening. There's a big ocean up here where things go. Where did all this fruit come from? It came from this area here, where people are enjoying the culture of their fruit and picnics and song and dance and cooking, all these things happening in these trees that are along here. And then you see a fence row, and you see someone gathering the fruit from trees that they did not grow. Their trees are back here. There's University Fruit U and the museum. There's Fruit Camp. There's a marketplace where people are singing and busking. There's a stage with tickets and lots of people lining up to hear songs about fruit. Okay. So I just wanted to set that stage for you. And now I will read to you the story of Fruitlandia. Okay. Just a moment here. So you can imagine all these places as I read. Once upon a time, there was an orchard of enchanted fruit on the edge of Fruitlandia in Harvest County. The branches of the trees laden with fruit bowed over the fence and into an apple orchard. One day, the apple farmer noticed the enchanted fruit. He tasted it and found it was delicious. It was a refreshing change from his apples. The man had no view of the trunk or the roots of the enchanted trees. He had no knowledge of the origins or care taken to grow those trees. He did not know the grower. He knew one thing for sure. The enchanted fruit was amazingly nutritious and delightful to eat. Instantly, the apple farmer said, "This glorious enchanted fruit that hangs from the high branches over the fence and across the property line are mine." So he harvested the fruit every night and took them to the fresh market to sell along with his apples. Chatter began in the market about enchanted fruit. Its value was unmistakable to the people of Fruitlandia. Enchanted fruit became the most popular fruit of all. People devoured the enchanted fruit, mixed it with other fruits to enhance flavor and nutrition. They ate it raw and displayed its beauty in bowls and arrangements. Eventually, someone asked the apple farmer, "How do you grow this glorious fruit?" Another asked, "Where do you find the seeds?" Yet another asked, "Can you tell me about the roots and branches?" In an attempt to answer so many questions, the apple farmer filled the gaps of his knowledge with tales that satisfied the people. The tales became news, and news became history. Details didn't matter to most people. That nice apple farmer wants to enjoy his enchanted fruit and share it with others because it's so good, they said. The people of Fruitlandia had no reason to think otherwise. As the man aged, he allowed trusted young farmers to help him harvest the enchanted fruit. They could not see that the hidden trees did not belong to the apple farmer. They harvested fruit just as he did, without learning much about the enchanted fruit or the people that grew the orchard. Generations passed. The earliest harvesters were gone. The man was gone. The enchanted fruit became an integral part of Fruitlandia, and so did the tales the apple farmer told. History was recorded as fact and taught to anyone who wanted to know about the enchanted fruit until now. So what I'd like you to do is, from your own experience, think of different things that you know and understand about the music and the dance that you enjoy, and imagine where it goes in Fruitlandia. Is it along the apple orchard fence line? Does it belong with the people who are picking, who learned from the original farmer? Maybe it belongs at the university or in the museum. Or maybe your experience belongs in fruit camp or the marketplace or on stage, either as a performer or in the audience, or ticket sales even. Is it with export to the large city where all sorts of things are going on? Or is it further export to away to far lands? So what I'll do is, as you think of some things that might apply to Fruitlandia as we consider appropriation and appreciation, if you say those things, I'll write them down on a Post-it and we'll stick them up and see how much we can populate this chart. And I guess you can unmute and speak out if there's something in the chat that's going to be a little harder to do.
So Dena, can you say one more time what you'd like people to do or say in the chat?
Come up with an example of something that this fruit might represent. Someone says Cecil Sharp was an old fence farmer. So that's a great example. So Cecil Sharp was an old fence farmer, I think they called it. I like that phrase. I'm writing that down, and that will go right here. You won't be able to see the words, but we'll point them out as things are said. White jazz singers like Bing Crosby. Where would you put that? Somebody put that in the chat. Jazz singers like Bing Crosby.
Like or the performance stage.
On the performance stage. Okay, great. That goes right there. Someone agreed, it goes to the stage. You guys get the idea. So just start firing them out and I'll keep up as best I can.
Dream catchers.
Dream catchers. Where would you place that?
Market.
That's a good one.
Or fruit camp.
Or fruit camp. That's great. We'll stick it somewhere in between. Dream catchers. I think someone asked, are we talking about dance or are we talking about anything? Just to get you thinking about appreciation versus appropriation, it can be about anything at all.
I was thinking about like the Rolling Stones catching the licks of Muddy Waters and those African American musicians in rock and blue, you know, taking their blues tradition
Mm-hmm.
and making it popular to the wider culture.
Okay, that's a great one. Where would you put that?
Well, I think the stage
Okay,
and selling tickets.
all right. Put that right by the ticket booth. Any other ideas?
Dena, there's one from the chat, Western yoga practitioners, and
Ooh.
suggested maybe in the marketplace.
Very good one. Western yoga practitioners.
Might that not be adoption in some cases?
Very much so. Mhm. Very much so.
My dance teachers are the harvesters that learned from the farmer.
Your what teachers?
Dance teachers.
Dance teachers are the harvesters. Okay. Someone asked if the Western yoga might be adoption, I think they said, or appreciation. We're just talking about individuals' experience that they've had. So we're not indicting all people who do anything, because that wouldn't be very equitable. Okay. Any other ideas?
Flatfoot dancing.
Flatfoot dancing? Can you say more about that?
Yes, that the forms of solo jig dancing that came from Europe were significantly changed by the rhythms and the dance forms that were met in the African American and indigenous communities, both. And although and they were not acknowledged, or so they were passed on by the farmers and vaudeville to other newer generations of people who weren't aware of the roots.
Great. And where would you put that?
Fruit camp, university, the city, and the stage, pretty universal.
Yeah. How about right in here? And that way we're near all of them with fruit camp and the export. Thank you.
There's a bunch of things in the chat.
Okay. Any that stick out, you can just call them out, or the people who wrote those can call them out as well.
What about burning sage?
Burning sage.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll put that next to the dream catchers, eh?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example from my experience. Let me just turn this for a minute. I had learned Kumbaya in Girl Scout camp. So let me write that down, Kumbaya. And I was told that it was a Native American word and that there were hand symbols to go with that. And we learned these little hand symbols, and we used to do them and do the whole thing and sing the song. And then when I was in church one day, I heard someone sing, "Come by here, Lord, come by here." And I couldn't figure out why Sister Reeves knew my Girl Scout song and what Native American person she must learn that from. I was shocked and amazed. And I couldn't get over it. I was like, what is the way? How did she do that? Where did she get that from? And it's only been in the last couple of years that I learned that that song has a quite different origin. And they just recently gave credit to the Gullah Geechee people for first recording it. Some people say that it has African origins, but the Gullah Geechee people were actually given credit for the first recording. How the Gullah Geechee song ended up in the middle of Appalachia and then in my little ear, I, had to be the slave trade, but that's an example of fruit camp. Heard this at camp, knew for a long time that part of my culture was actually Native American, and it wasn't. So that's an example.
I have one for the fruit you.
Yes, Katie.
Inspired by a lot of music educators that I've spoken with the last couple of years.
Mhm.
They're, Kodai teachers in particular have very structured curriculum where they learn to teach music theory through folk music. And that community is working hard to audit all that content and to see if there's strong appropriate background information, if it's appropriate to use to share the music principles they want to teach, if they need to find alternatives. But that's a situation where there's a community that's really taking on the academic body of what they inherited from people before them.
Yes. So we put that by university. Can you think of any examples of this area?
I think a lot of what we do is taken from the area there without our realizing it. And then we put it in different places. We put it in the marketplace without, just like with Kumbaya or other things where we don't really, either we don't know or we don't think about. We just, it's either come down to us or we find it.
Right.
And we make it our own. And use it, not necessarily inappropriately, but learning more about it and understanding is certainly important and can enhance the whole experience, if that makes sense.
We could keep throwing out examples of people who are on the other side of the fence in some of what we've already mentioned.
So here's one suggestion from the chat: traveling dance groups from source communities. Would they be on the other side of the fence? Good question.
I play in a klezmer band, and the klezmer music was what the Jewish folks in Europe would be playing in the countries they were in order to be able to support themselves. And so the Romanians ones did Romanian music, the Russians did Russian music, the Bulgarians did Bulgarian music, and so on. And then it comes over in the South here, we have a klezmer band that's sort of bluegrass based, so it's called the Sinai Mountain Ramblers. That, of course, goes to the stage.
So there are a few other suggestions in the chat. So Native American powwows, might they be on the other side of the fence? That's a good question.
I think someone mentioned the urban rural spaces. And I know my family was definitely in the rural Appalachian region, and it is often funny to hear people from big cities or people from other parts of the world, reflecting back or singing back songs that my family sings or that many Appalachian families sing without really, I mean, they do a great job and they really appreciate Gene or whoever they learned it from, but they have no clue what it's like when we sing it at home or when we're up at the cemetery or whatever, the family and cultural things that go around that song are they haven't experienced that, and it's very clear. Not a bad thing.
That apply to somebody like Joan Baez back in the 60s, who sang a lot of folk songs that we all took as new, but they weren't. That on stage.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are having a good conversation. I lost connection there for a minute, but I am back. So I heard Joan Baez. And folk music. Can you guys hear me okay? Yep, okay. So I wanted to mention Mike Seeger and the work that he did with traditional dance, where he actually went into, he crossed the fence and went here. And he's not the only person to have done that, but there are others who have done that as well. So it sounds like you were all starting to have the conversation I'd like you to share in breakout groups. And we can go ahead and go into breakout groups for about 10 minutes to just talk about what are your thoughts when you're thinking about this whole picture. Is it helping to make appropriation and that spectrum of A's clearer for you? Appropriation versus appreciation versus adoption versus adoration. And think about that spectrum. And then we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes. Does that sound good? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing thumbs up.
Okay, just finishing getting the breakout rooms ready.
Thank you.
Will we be auto-assigned to breakout rooms?
Yes, we are doing that randomly. I'm just finishing that now. Okay, here we go.
Thanks for your patience while I was in no man's land, no person's land for a minute.
So challenging.
Yeah.
I just encourage them to keep thinking about who's on the other side, who might be on the other.
Great. As people start to file back in, take a nice breath and sit back. And if you've got your special thing, my beaver chunk, go ahead and take that out and hold it. Remind yourself that you're doing a good work.
Dena, one thought I had was another A word that might be interesting would be acknowledgement.
Oh, very good. Yes.
Where that fits in the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Each time I do this, people come up with more A words. I think that's neat. We should just have like a book of A words.
Awareness would be another one you've probably had.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Without awareness, how do we know?
Right.
So that we don't become the other A word.
How about affection?
Right.
How about affection?
Affection. Mm-hmm. That's neat. We should have like one of those word find puzzles where you find all of them.
Yeah. Oh, attribution is good.
Mm-hmm. Attribution. Yeah. Apology. I presented this to a group of kids at Augusta Heritage Center. And one of the kids pointed to the farmer and said, I think the farmer should cross the fence and apologize to the people and then ask to learn from them. I almost cried. So there's hope for our future. I mean, from the mouths of babes, a little kid said that. So, all right, so I think we are back from the breakout session. Ask is another A word I see in the chat. Yeah, that's neat. And I'll be sharing notes with the good people at CDSS that I've taken. So now that you've been in small group to consider what this all means and what the spectrum of aid means and the spectrum of aids, and I hope that you're getting a feel for what appropriation is versus appreciation, even in your own lives and in your own practices as you're working with the dance communities. You may even be thinking of ways in which you can already change some of the things that you do. And what I would like to do, there were some specific questions that came up during the registration and then just in our conversation during the break that I'd like to address and I'd like you to consider when we do our next breakout, which is coming up soon. So one of the questions is, how much of this do we have to do? What's the list that I need to tick off the boxes to say, I've done this? How do I know that? The flip side of that question is, how much do we have to do in order to consider ourselves, I don't know, awake, aware, enlightened on this whole topic? And they're kind of the same questions on the same push me, pull you, right? It's all along that same line of what do I need to do and how much? And I like to give this illustration for people. Just showing up to a workshop like this is the start. It's a start. It might not be the only start that you've had, but it's a start. And it might be a continuation of a journey you've already started. If you feel the need, yeah, you can tick a box saying, I heard about what appropriation really means. I understand it from Fruitlandia. And Fruitlandia is available to you. We'll put it in the chat. I have basic notes on it. If you want to present this to a group that you're in, you can get it through Amazon. And you can always contact me if you have questions. But what I'd like to point out is that we are at a unique point in history right now. People are killing one another over the questions that we're asking today, the things that we're talking about. People are just now waking up to the idea that maybe the way they've been living is appropriated. And they didn't even know. There was no intention, but they're just now waking up to that. And that's a hard realization. Think about it. 150 years ago, we weren't even allowed to sit in the same room. You know, I certainly wasn't allowed to sit in a room and address a group of people who don't look like me. Nor were you, anyone who doesn't look like me, allowed to go and sit and listen to someone who didn't look like you. There was a lot more segregation. Antebellum, postbellum, all of it, okay? Think about it again. 50 years ago, people were being killed for trying to do what was lawful, which was to gather. You know, people of different races weren't even allowed to marry one another when I was born, and I'm not that old. Think about 20, maybe 30 years ago. Rights had changed, things were a little more open, but we were all a little too fat and happy to care. We were too busy running around doing our thing, chasing the almighty dollar. Some of us, not all of us, okay? And now we've all kind of looked up and looked around and asked ourselves, just like on that Maslow's hierarchy, where do I belong? And how good am I at what I'm doing? What's my esteem in this area of racial harmony? Where am I? What role do I have in this? And we're asking those questions and we don't even have the language yet. So I have postulated that our job for this generation is to form the language, is to ask those questions. How do I talk to someone who doesn't look like me? How do I talk to someone who wasn't raised in the same culture that I was raised in? Someone asked the question, what qualifies a person as BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color? What qualifies someone as BIPOC? I have no idea. It's probably self-described. You know, how do you determine that a person is anything that they are, except they tell you? You can't look at someone and categorize them. I made a huge mistake. I went to a powwow one year and I was so happy to be at the powwow, and I saw a guy who was very dark skinned, a lot darker than I am. I just assumed he was Black, and I went up and gave him the brother nod and was like ready to jump in and talk to him, and he was horribly offended. And I felt like an idiot. I apologized, but you know, just by looking at him, I thought he was Black. Well, he wasn't. He was actually Cherokee. And so we have to define language, and our language reflects our consciousness. That's what I was talking about at the beginning. One of the other questions that we had was, how do we attract people to an event? How do we attract people that don't look like ourselves to an event? And how do we make it welcoming? Okay. A good question is, how many people that don't look like you do you know? How would you invite anybody to one of your events? You're not going to be able to put an ad in a paper, in a newsletter or something and say, we are open and welcoming to Black, Indigenous, Asian, all people that aren't white. You can't do that. I mean, you can do it, but you're not going to get much response, because people who aren't white will read that and say, this sounds scary. Maslow's hierarchy again, safety. Okay. So think about the people that you know. If you don't know anybody at your job who doesn't look like you, if you don't know anybody in your neighborhood who doesn't look like you, if you don't know anybody in your classroom or in your family who doesn't look like you, you've got a lot more work to do than what to do about your dance group. And it's time. It's time for us to start to look around and see what our relationships are. That's how you draw people in, it's through relationship. Okay. A tick box way to take care of that is to start to hire people who don't look like you, or to invite callers who don't look like you. But be sure, if you're going to do that, have some support set up for them, because they will face discrimination. They just will. It's our nature in this country. And if you don't have some way to address that, you're sure to have failure and disappointment and hurt feelings and maybe worse. Okay? So if you're going to launch into that, then you start to have scholarships and things, hiring practices, have some support, some kind of basis of support. Okay.
Dena, could you just say a little bit more about what that basis of support would look like for someone who might not know? I mean, I organize an event, and that sounds really important, and I can get behind that, but I wouldn't know what to do.
Okay. One thing to start off with is, if you have a prospective person that you'd like to invite, ask them what they need. I run a festival called the Appalachian On Time Music Gathering. It's for Black string band performers. And what I would need is far from what some of the people in my group need, even though we look very much the same. I actually would not want what they want, and they don't want what I want. So asking a person a hire or an invite like that might look a little differently than your typical hire. So it might not be a cattle call where you pull, you might have to address someone that you know, and someone that's willing to walk with you as you unpack the systemic racism in your own setting. Okay. I hope that helps. Yeah. Okay. So one other question that we had, and then I want to give you a chance to meet in a larger group. It talked about, it led me to the thought of dialogue. There was a question about, what do we do about people who show up who are typically of a certain category, cisgender, white, usually male, older, who says, I don't want to change. Okay. So what do you do about that? How do you effectively influence them? Was the word that I wanted to think about, influence. What we're talking about is building relationship. We are not going to be able, in any dispute, be able to pile on more facts and reasons why something is good in order to ask someone to change. That's a sure way to drive someone off. This is something that we look at in conflict transformation. If you have people who just do not see eye to eye on things, but have to live together, the last thing you want to do is show all the reasons why you ought to think the way I think. You'll just shut them down because they already think you're wrong. Okay, so now you just gave them more reasons to believe you're wrong. Okay, so instead of doing that, if you can, in a very humble way, try to find some point in which they might have a point. They might be right. This example keeps coming up for me. If you do have an older person who says, I don't want to change, maybe they met their partner at a dance. And the way a certain song is sung and a way a certain song is called reminds them of that magical moment when they met their partner. And now they're confronted with changing those words. Well, that might not feel real comfortable for them. And if you can meet them on the human side of where they are and understand, then that makes all the difference. So here's ways that we communicate. There are three ways we communicate. One is debate. Each of these have their own purpose. One is debate. And debate, there's always one person or group presenting information that the other group is wrong, and it's being presented to an audience. Okay, so it's my job to convince an audience that I'm right and this guy's wrong. And it's this person's job to convince an audience that I'm right and this guy's wrong. Okay, that's what debate is. That's what you hear in a courtroom. And it has its place. It's not real conducive to social change, but it does have its place. The second way we communicate as human beings is conversation. And in conversation, we're doing everything we can to preserve the relationship. So we will find some point of agreement, no matter what it is, no matter how small it is, we'll find that point of agreement so that we can say, oh, okay, I didn't offend, they didn't offend me, we're good. We can agree that the sky is blue. Maybe that's all you can get to. And sometimes you'll hear people say, well, at least we can agree to disagree. That's a conversation. What we aim for in this kind of work is dialogue. And dialogue is when you speak as clearly as you can to be understood, and you listen as intently as you can in order to understand. You're not trying to agree. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're not trying to be convinced. All you're trying to do is understand how somebody could come to the conclusions they come to, no matter how far they are from what you think. And it's where we start to make change. If we can at least understand why someone has those ideas and thoughts that I don't have, I can at least understand it, then that's a beginning. Okay. So I want you to think about the things that we talked about, some of the changes that you can make, building relationship, building understanding with those that don't want change. I've even heard of a group that has a spot where you stand. If you want a dance partner, you can go stand in this spot, and it takes away that awkwardness of trying to find somebody to dance with. I think that's kind of cool. So think about some of these things and ways that you might change the work that you're doing in your setting. We're going to give you about, let's go with 12 minutes. And then we'll come back together and see what you've come up with. All right. This time you're going to be in groups of about 6. Okay. All right.
I believe we have Danny Spur, who is, hi Danny. I'm not sure what's going on there. Dena, thank you for launching into that.
Sure. You know, I could do this all night. I do. I love this work. The State Department has an ambassadors program where it used to be the Jazz Masters program, where the jazz musicians used to go around the world to teach them a little bit about American culture. Well, that has morphed into a new program called Next Level, and it's to take hip hop around the world to teach them about American culture. And I actually do their conflict transformation setup so that when people go and if they find themselves in conflict, they get to, so it's actually several days, and it's so neat because you get to talk to these people who just, their concept of conflict and transforming conflict is so refreshing. It's really neat to watch and listen to them and learn from them while I'm teaching. Yeah.
It's great.
Mm-hmm. Just looking through the questions to make sure we hit most of them.
Yeah, I was looking through too. Is the recording still on, or is it paused right now?
That was abrupt.
Oops.
We got thrown back in. Are we part of your group?
No, I think it ended.
Oh, okay. There was no warning. It was just like
Right.
Yeah, there was a little time clock at the top that wasn't very easy to see. It was saying how much time was left.
It's all good. We're here now.
We're here.
Yeah.
We're good.
Be here now.
Like, time travel.
In a few decades, we'll be able to tell all our horrific Zoom stories when all of this is over.
Actually, in a couple of decades, we'll be on Zoom and we'll forget what people look like in 3 dimensions.
Well, the other side of the story is that I wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for Zoom. So there is a big plus for that too.
We couldn't all be here in one place if it weren't for Zoom.
Yeah, right.
Well, it looks like we are all back, and I hope you had a great and productive dialogue and very little debate, and that you got some understanding from the people that you got to chat with. Hopefully you got some ideas about things that you could do in your own backyard, in your own setting, some local things that you could do. What I'd like to do now for about the next 10 minutes or so is just take your questions. I've gone over a lot of material, and I appreciate all of you who've hung in here for this long. But let's open the floor up to questions.
I have a question. I'm not sure the procedure for it.
Just ask away.
Okay, so at the very end of our last breakout, I was referencing something that you said that really struck me, that someone who had asked about the idea of what a lot of contra dance groups ask is, how come we can't get more people of color to come and everything? And you said, how many BIPOC people do you have in your lives? How many do you have relationships with? And if you don't, then you have a lot bigger issues to tackle than who you're inviting to your dance and why they are or aren't coming. And it seems like that was in response to the question we were talking about in the group was about someone on a board who was insistent about banishing certain tunes. So the larger question I want to ask you is, to me, it seems like that what you just said is we should keep our eyes on the larger issues, which is if we're fussing about which tunes are appropriate, but we're not actually in our lives going out and trying to make genuine relationships and build community, that's the bigger problem, not what tunes are on the keep list or not. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
At the core of the things we're talking about is social change. And if you hope to tick boxes and make social change in one arena without looking at the social change needed across your life, it's going to be difficult. It will be very difficult to do the work with authenticity. Does that mean you need to pack up and move to a neighborhood full of people that don't look like you? No, not really. But if you're at a social event and there are people there who don't look like you, instead of spending all your time with people that look like yourself or people that you know, you might need to step out and get to know other people. And as an introvert, to me, that's horrifying, but it needs to be done. And sometimes I ask myself to do that. Because the others have been attached to so much fear in our culture, we have to step out of that. And the only way to step out of that fear is to start to engage.
So Dena, I want to ask a question that was one of the questions asked at the registration. So here's this question. What might reparative work look like within this particular community?
Okay. Reparative work, reparations, restoration, all of those need to be done in the presence of restorative justice. And when we look at restorative justice, we mean the willingness to admit that there's been harm and to take whatever personal responsibility you have for either causing the harm, enjoying the benefits of the harm, perpetuating the harm. There has to be some acknowledgement of harm. That's the hard work for the people in power in any restorative work. That's the hard work. The other side of that hard work is that apology being accepted as sincere and genuine, and then being willing to work on the restorative justice to repair that relationship. That likely won't happen in a generation. It hasn't so far. But we can start the work by understanding one another through dialogue and using authentic language that reflects our consciousness.
Emily, you have a question. I think you can unmute.
Thanks. I'm not quite sure how to.
I'm not hearing her.
Emily, I think you're muted again.
Sorry. I have heard some people talk about wanting to have more people who self-identify as BIPOC at their events. I also kind of bring in the lens that some of these traditions that some of us are doing have been historically done by white people, and others were not allowed to attend those events or participate in those events. And so they may not even seem like a safe space in a historical narrative or in a historical memory type of way for people to think that, oh yeah, I would go to something that was, has this white person history to it and where I was not included. And I was wondering if you could speak to, like, I know in Appalachia with the square dancing, there's a clear connection between white and Black and potentially Indigenous people all participating in those traditions. If something's more like Morris dancing or French Canadian square dancing, there's not that type of historical connection to people that look different from each other, and how can our spaces feel safe and feel welcoming when historically they haven't been that.
Right. I think I understand your question. Is what you do fun? Question. Is what you do fun?
I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you like about it?
I get to connect with people. I get to dance to music that I really enjoy. I also feel a connection to the historical tradition that relates back to my heritage.
Okay.
So there's a number of things going on there.
I hear the joy in your voice when you talk about that. So why not connect with the objective of understanding to someone who doesn't look like you to say, this is so much fun, and it's actually part of my culture. I'd love you to try it. And maybe when we connect, you can tell me a little bit about the things that you find joyful about dance in your culture. What would it look like to have a night like that? Bring your dance. Show us what you got. Teach us something, and we'll teach you what we know. You know, with that, you can add some historical perspective to kind of open it up. But it's looking at things in a different way. Connect with people at the place where you connect with what you enjoy, and then share that.
So Dena, another question from the chat about authentic language, and could you talk more about that?
Saying what's really at your core, letting your language reflect your consciousness. If you just don't get something, say, I just don't get it. I don't get it now, but I'm on my way to understanding. Okay. This might be horribly offensive to people, so plug your ears if you need to. I'm giving you a warning. My husband is white. He grew up in Scotland. He's a wonderful person. He thought Blackie was a term of endearment. We had to work through that. Because the first time he called me Blackie, I was like, excuse me? But his language is authentic. He meant something beautiful and wonderful. That meant something beautiful and wonderful to him. And I let him know that's not good. So even authentic language can be troublesome at times. But we have to be willing to hear from others, to hear others say, that doesn't work so well with me. Okay. I don't like the term African American. I just don't like it. Do I have reasons for it? I have no idea. The reason why I don't like African American and I prefer Black is because I grew up dancing around in my church shoes on a linoleum to James Brown's saying, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. He didn't say it loud, I'm African American and I'm proud. He said, I'm Black and I'm proud. I chipped my tooth spinning around on the linoleum, dancing to that. That's how dedicated I am to James Brown's understanding of using the word Black. So I prefer to be called Black. Yeah, I've got some Scottish. Yeah, I've got some East Indian in me, but that's how I resonate. I resonate with that. So finding out what's authentic language for you, how you prefer to be, how you prefer to communicate. That's what I mean by authentic language. Okay. So I would love to take more questions. I could answer questions or attempt to answer questions all night, but we do have to wrap things up. And I'd like to first just thank you for coming to this. I'd like you to take a moment to take a nice deep breath in, and take in all that you learned, and a nice deep breath out with the intention to put some of the things into practice. So take a deep breath in as you remember some things that you heard that might challenge you. And as you take a deep breath out, remember you don't have to do it all right now. This is a beginning, and that we're all starting this journey together. Okay. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Dena. This has been a wonderful, wonderful